Okay, this is chapter 29 of the book Medical Reformation. And this chapter is going to be about intelligence. What is intelligence, and how do you develop it? And again, I briefly mentioned this last chapter, but to me it's obvious. If you want to be good at making money, you got to talk about money. If you want to be good at school, you have to learn study skills. By the way, I've never in my whole entire life ever met a single person that was taught study skills in their junior high or in their high school. Okay? So the established institutions of society, in general, they're almost all fake, okay? Grade schools, junior highs, and high schools are not there to educate children. They're there to make them conform as dummies, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about developing intelligence. And remember, the goal of all this is to be the best you can be. My goal is to be the best doctor in the world, to understand stuff better than anyone else in the whole world. So I really want to get everything right, okay? Because I know it makes a giant difference, all right? And I've seen how people develop intellectually. Most people, they're stuck in this mentality of, oh, if you're smart, you get a good grade in school. But school doesn't really teach you how to do anything original. Doing original work is something you do on your own. It doesn't even consider that. And I'll just give you one example, like with my kids. I was trying to nurture a love of learning and reading and thinking and presenting and drawing in my kids. And my wife would be like, what is wrong with you? You're obsessive, compulsive, you're crazy, you're autistic, you're going to make the kid as crazy as you. A fourth grade kid doesn't need to learn PowerPoint. And I'm like, sweetheart, you don't understand. Let me just talk to the kid about academic stuff. I get it in a way you don't get it. What I'm trying to say is if you want a kid to be good at drawing, let them see all the beautiful art. Then they'll want to create art themselves. It's that inner drive that's built in them from seeing how great something is, how beautiful it is, how magnificent, how good it is. And so what you want to do is focus on building that, and the grades in the school will take care of themselves, rather than this idea, you always have to be a carrot and a stick. No, inner drive and love and sense of awareness of greatness and beauty and goodness and a noble goal, those things are much more powerful than just the carrot and the stick. Okay, so first quote. This is from Albert Binet, the inventor of the IQ test. With practice, training, and method, we can increase our attention, our memory, our judgment, and become more intelligent. So the guy who invented the IQ test knew it's pretty obvious you can increase IQ. And all these college guys are a bunch of phonies who say you can't increase IQ. That is completely untrue. And they should be ashamed of themselves. But like I said, they're not there to help the kids, okay? They're there to get their money and maintain the institution's standard policies and hierarchy. Okay, Theodore Dalrymple, he's this writer from England, and here's what he says. He says, the British are barbarians camped out in the relics of an older and superior civilization to whose beauties they are oblivious. Yes, when a population loses respect for their history and their tradition, their history and their traditions get destroyed. And that's what's happened in England. That's why England has turned into a third world crap hole, and that's why America is turning into a third world crap hole. So the way to prevent that is for people to be aware of these things, and you have to care about something in order to preserve it. Western civilization is the greatest civilization ever existed in the history of the world. There's nothing even close, okay? I've been studying art, okay? It's so magnificent, it's not even funny. The music, it's so magnificent, it's not even funny. There's nothing even in the ballpark, all this multicultural stuff. Why does everybody want to come to the United States? Or did used to in the past, from about 1960 to 1990. Then it's been going down rapidly since then, okay? Whereas Americans don't want to go anywhere else, even the educated ones. All right, so the next quote. This one's from Charles Darwin. Even people who aren't geniuses can outthink the rest of mankind if they develop certain thinking habits. Yeah. And John Taylor Gatto, he's a great educator, wrote a bunch of books about developing the brain and education. And he basically said, look, all the poor kids go to these typical public schools where they just do rote memorization and they're sort of, managed like cattle. He says the wealthy kids send their kids to boarding schools or to, prep schools where they have a lot of sophisticated debate, pursue their own individual interest, and those things really develop your mind. Okay. So here's some quotes from Neil Stevenson, the writer. The difference between stupid and intelligent people, and this is true whether or not they are well educated, is that intelligent people can handle subtlety. And that's true. They can handle the nuance. Okay, his next quote. The difference between an ignorant person and an educated person is that the educated person knows more facts, But that has nothing to do with whether or not they are stupid or intelligent. Yeah, so an educated person has memorized something. A lot of degrees are really just guild barriers. Like look at the medical degree. It's a guild barrier, so someone else can't sell the same drugs. But it doesn't mean the person who has the MD is necessarily smarter. They just pay their dues academically. As we well know, health coaches have a lot more to offer people for improving their health than do most doctors, the vast majority of doctors. Because medical school just teaches you how to sell drugs. If you learn health for real, nutrition, epidemiology, toxicology, you can really help people. Okay, here's a good one by Mary Pettibone Poole. To repeat what others have said requires education. To challenge it requires brains. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I like McDougall a lot. Because McDougall looks at the established paradigm and then he studies it extensively from multiple different perspectives, and that's kind of like John Stuart Mill's quote, to really understand something, you got to read about it from all the different perspectives. And he'll do that, and then he'll show what is objectively true and not true. So I think that's very good on health and nutrition topics. He's great at doing that, okay? I think, the internal medicine docs, like Dr. McDougall and Esselstyn, sort of the same ilk, even though he's a surgeon. They sort of think they've achieved, health nirvana by doing what's best for the heart, and they'll tell you what's good for the heart is good for the brain. I actually see things a little different. I'm primarily a brain doctor, and I sort of think what's good for the brain's a lot more fussy than the heart. So I go into a lot more stuff they're not going to go into because the brain's fussier. But I can just tell you, I've studied all these guys. McDougall's really, really smart, and he really digs down to the truth on things. So that's why I think he's the best one out there. I also think I'm up in that category, but I'm just telling you, because people ask me all the time, they send me viewer comments. Well, so-and-so said this, or some troll wrote a post. I get lots of trolls that post the opposite of the truth. So you have to be strong in your mind. Realize no one cares about you. You're a pro. You have no money. There's nothing you could do for anyone, okay? That's important to know because the pros, they get so badly abused. I really feel sorry for them. I see terrible things happen to pros all the time because they're naive. They sort of trust the system. They don't have any awareness of the fact the system could give a rat's tail about them. And you have to understand that no one cares about you, not at all. No one cares if you get sick, if you suffer, you die. And once you understand that, then you'll be more able to be your own advocate and figure out what is true and see that it's worth the effort to try. Because I've had even a bunch of friends, family, and relatives who go to some local expert and they go, well, it's not your specialty. I think I'm going to go with the expert. I'm like, you do whatever you want, you stupid chump. Okay, I've had friends, family, relatives, friends of friends, they're too shy to have a face-to-face conversation about nutrition. They go for bariatric surgery, have terrible complications. I've seen all kinds of things. The average person in the public thinks surgery is like this great thing. Surgery is very dangerous. There's times when you need to have it done, but there's often major consequences to it, so you don't do it unless you have to. Okay, now here's something about general intelligence. I think this is Jordan Peterson quote. Oh no, this is Jeffrey Miller quote. Jeffrey Miller is another professor. He wrote some books about IQ. Okay, so he's a psychologist. He wrote a book called Spent, which is actually a pretty good book. All right, so here's his quote. General intelligence, also known as IQ, intelligence quotient, or general cognitive ability, they often call it the G factor, is a way of quantifying the intelligence variability among people. Here's the big line. You want to remember this one. You might want to print screen this one. It is the best established, most predictive, most heritable mental trait ever discovered in psychology. So out of everything in psychology, this is by far the most scientific thing there is. The thing that everybody from all the universities and other places criticizes and stuff is actually the thing that's actually true and most reliable. And then Miller goes on. He says, whether it's measured with a formal IQ test or assessed through informal conversations and observation, IQ or intelligence predicts objective performance and learning ability across all important life domains that show reliable differences. I would even take it a little farther. Like, what is the verbal SAT? It's basically a memorization test. How much vocabulary have you memorized? How many logical fallacies have you memorized and are capable of using on a daily basis in real life interactions? And this is not a question of how smart you are. It's a question of how much knowledge you have accumulated. And that's why it's so worthwhile to study for these tests, is because you can dramatically improve your performance. like I said too, when the first time I took the SAT test, I was a junior in high school. My whole self-identity was an athlete. I'm like, oh, the stupid test is a hassle. I went out the night before. I could care less. I just took the test, and I did reasonably well, but I later started hanging around about 6 months later with some guys who were on the cross country team, and they had all done much better than me on the SAT test. And I was pissed off, and I would say to myself, and I was starting to think, wow, gosh, my injuries for wrestling had not fully healed. I kept getting re-injured, and I'm like, well, gee, I might have to become serious about school. And I played like Mastermind, Monopoly with these guys, and I'm like, gosh, I can hang with these guys. They're not that much smarter than me. Why not me? Why can't I score better on this test? So I just bought the book, and I retook the SAT like 2 or 3 more times, and my score went up about 300 points more. So way, way, way up there. And there was no change in my brain. There was no change in the genetics of my mind. I simply studied for the test, and it makes a giant difference. I didn't go to any courses. I just bought the book at home and went through it. Okay. Okay, so, and then Jordan Peterson will tell you the same thing. Jordan Peterson has some decent lectures on IQ, and he'll talk about it's the most reliable thing in all of psychology. That's actually well known. People just get pissed off because the results don't come out the way they want them to come out. But that's the real thing. And then all the colleges and stuff, they all tell you, oh, you can't change IQ. Bullshit. It's so obvious, it's not even funny. If you sleep well the night before the test, you do better. Okay, was that an improvement in your IQ? If you eat a healthier diet, you get better blood flow to your brain. Is that an improvement in your IQ? If you avoid alcohol and stimulants, you get an improvement in your IQ. If you avoid the junk food, so you get not only better perfusion, but avoid all the mitochondria inhibitors, avoid all the preservatives, the fungal inhibitors, you will have increased academic performance. If you exercise, you'll have increased academic performance. If you read every day, you'll have increased academic performance. If you avoid head trauma, you'll have increased academic performance. Okay, if you sit in the front row, you'll have better recollection of the event. If you study the questions in advance and do them again, you'll have better performance. All of these things are increasing your performance, and there's a whole bunch more. It's obvious. Any idiot can know that in 5 seconds. So when all these, just because a college professor says something, that doesn't really mean anything. College professors, in my experience, are mostly a joke, okay? All of the greatest men are maniacs. They are possessed by a mania which drives them towards their goal. This is Ian Fleming, the author of James Bond. The great scientists, philosophers, religious leaders are all maniacs. What else but a blind singleness of purpose could have kept them in the groove of purpose? Mania is as priceless as genius. So there's a point in that. I mean, one of the reasons why almost all the great geniuses who transform a field are a little bit crazy is in order to go way beyond what other people have done and being able to see things in a new way, you have to have this incredible monomaniacal devotion to it, And Goethe said as well, in order for a man to learn a complex topic, he must love it. And Schopenhauer had said, the best books, they're all written by, almost all of them are written by amateurs because the amateur does it out of love because he's really interested in the subject. He wants to understand it. Whereas most professionals are kind of phony. If they publish something, it's just, because they get paid to do that. It's part of their job, part of their prestige. It's just all of a BS game that they play. And Schopenhauer would point out he was the best philosopher ever in the history of Germany. Well, him and Nietzsche and Goethe's kind of up there. There's a little bit of a different stock. But he couldn't get a job as a philosopher. And he said, you'll almost never see a philosopher who is a philosophy professor who's a philosopher, which is kind of funny. Okay, a little bit now about what is intelligence. We'll come back to more quotes on it in a moment. So some bits about defining intelligence. On the one hand, you could say intelligence is more than one thing, by the way. And it's sort of, these are parts of it. The quickness to understand. I know a lot of doctors that are quick to understand. They will get something rather fast, which to me indicates they're highly intelligent in terms of their genetic intelligence. But a lot of them, they could care less. They just want to make their money, go home, spend some time with their family. They could care less about really learning. They've sort of got learning helplessness. They've learned that patients never get better from the chronic diseases. The whole thing in medicine is kind of a big joke. So you just show up, pay your dues, go through your motions, practice standard care. You get your money, okay? And they don't care. They're not going to read a paper or read a textbook beyond what they have to for boards because the whole thing's a big joke. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is they won't get as high in their knowledge as somebody who really wants to understand. Like I told you, my internal medicine friend told me that his friend is smarter than me because he thinks his friend understands things faster than I do, and he probably does. But he's not that curious, so I know tons more than he does. So the desire to learn, the higher level curiosity increases your intelligence in that given field or domain. Ability to recognize patterns, to connect the dots, put it all together. Ability to handle nuance and complexity. Okay, ability to learn stuff, can they learn quickly? Can they learn from their experience and apply it to something new? Are they able to think abstractly? Are they able to create a more accurate model of the world? You basically, to be a true expert, you have an accurate model of the domain, whatever it might be. Practicing medicine, understanding nutrition, living healthy. Are you able to see the connections between seemingly disparate items and come up with new metaphors? See the connections between seemingly different fields. And whatever field you're in, you have to read the adjacent ones. Like if you want to be good at nutrition and be really, really good at it, you got to also read toxicology. You got to also read epidemiology. Those are the adjacent domains that are relevant. Ability to perform the task, okay? Ability to solve problems in that domain, the ability to do, like, if you're in a plug and chug class, you got to know how to solve problems. But in more than that, in real life, like Aristotle's old quote, a shipbuilder builds ships. Okay. Like for a lot of students, they'll have studied the notes and think they understand the lecture, but you got to do the practice problems. That's more of a school thing than a life thing. Okay, ability to succeed in life. Can you act in your own interest responsibly? Can you accomplish your goals? Can you motivate yourself to follow through? Because a lot of times, greatness comes from just having the desire to push every day. A lot of times you'll see a young person, and it's the kid who's got that intensity of purpose who goes on to be great success. I had a friend in wrestling, and he was not the most talented guy. I could kick the crap out of him pretty easily, okay? But he really wanted to be a wrestler. And he just went to every practice, stayed late every day during technique, went to every single tournament in the off season, and he became a World Open Cup champ. He became a superstar. He's 3-time All-American. He was great. And it was all just mostly from desire. He really didn't have that much athletic ability. Okay, so intensity of purpose is an essential thing. And the great champions I know, like like Mark Schultz, World Olympic champion. At the time, he was sort of just out of college. He's like, I don't even own anything except for this stupid motorcycle, and it doesn't work. But I'm going to be a world champ. And that's all he cared about, and he did it, And that guy was like the most intense person I ever met in my life. And that made him a lot better. Okay. He would do weird things like not even talk to anyone a week before a tournament. And he felt that magnified his intensity when out there on the mat. And it did. I saw it. It was kind of amazing. Okay, the ability to control one's emotions and to behave in one's self-interest. Yeah, people who are emotional and impulsive and overreact immediately all the time, they seldom achieve much. You got to learn how to kind of keep your cool, because a lot of bad things are going to happen, especially as you rise to higher levels. A lot of people are going to be jealous of you. They're going to sabotage you. They're going to badmouth you. They're going to do passive-aggressive crap. And so you just have to accept that that's part of rising in a competitive environment, is all these games and stuff. So you have to keep your cool. Don't burn bridges for no reason, that sort of thing. And then, again, ability to navigate whatever domain it is that you're in. And what I'm talking about, the relevance of understanding all this stuff, is you develop improved metacognition, the ability to think about thinking about what you're doing, to be more conscious in real time, and you'll make wiser choices. You'll be better able to see the consequences of your decisions. You'll be better able to adapt, better able to keep your options open. Language skills. Okay, somebody who's got a high verbal IQ, they have the ability, to make jokes and puns and rhymes. That's a sign of being clever. And that's a good thing. Anybody who's funny is actually pretty clever. They might not be serious about school, but they're smart. Okay, the ability to perceive and to describe things. Somebody who's really good in a field, they can look at it, and I remember like this with the Schultz brothers, with Dave and Mark Schultz, and they could talk about technique in so much detail, and you could see it as they were describing it. It was pretty impressive. Ability to make sophisticated observations. That's kind of more the same thing. Like a great art historian can real quickly connect all the findings in the picture and tie them into historical connections. A good doctor can look at a complex, let's say, CT scan, MRI scan, or patient's chart and put it all together. That's somebody who really knows the domain, a true expert. Okay. And the big thing in most domains, is you have to know what causes something, what causes what. So like to be a great doctor, you got to know what causes a disease. In conventional medicine, they never learn what causes the disease, and if you don't know what causes the disease, you're probably not going to be too good at treating it, so you can't be that good of a doctor. You got to learn causes, okay? And we've talked about, basically poor nutrition and toxicology cause most things. Eventually, motivation comes from within. Being motivated from without can get you pretty far in the academic world, okay? But you can never be great with that. You can get good grades. You can accomplish your career goals to get the job you want, the grad school you want. I've seen plenty of people who are pretty smart in that sense and who became doctors just because they were motivated to be respectable in their own area, have that status, make that decent amount of money. I knew one lady doctor, for example, who said to me, well, the only reason I went into medicine is it's the only way I know for sure that I can make money. I'm good at school, but I stink at other stuff. I stink at business. I don't have that warm or friendly of a personality. All I know is in medicine, you just take a test. I'm good at doing that, so I'm going to be a doctor. I'll make my money. And I'll live in a nice house in the suburbs, have a nice car, and nobody will bother me. Okay, and I don't have to kiss a man's ass if I don't want to. Okay, so what I'm saying is that's enough to be good and be successful through medical school. But if you want to do something like, discover a new thing, transform the field, man, you got to have higher aspirations than that. Because I've known some real academically solid people who did nothing after med school because they had no goal after med school. They simply wanted to get into a good residency, then that's it. That was the whole purpose of studying, was to get into a good residency. Versus the people who discover something, they want to achieve something. They want to discover something. They got much higher aspirations. So that motivation comes from within to propel them way beyond what is average. Okay, eagerness to excel, eagerness to study, ability to concentrate for long hours. So again, too, if you're studying something because your goal is something bigger, like I used to say, biochemistry is the language of God that he uses to write the book of life. So I was very excited and enthusiastic about studying biochemistry, okay? And I really wanted to become a great doctor. So I love studying pathology, understanding the diseases, what causes them, and what's the mechanisms of disease. And for somebody else who just wants to make money as a doctor, then studying is going to be a pain in the butt, and it's going to be harder for them to study, more than 5 hours in a day. Versus if you're thrilled to have the opportunity to study these things, then it's easy to study 10 hours or more in a day. So that's kind of where it comes from. And you can look at it in the positive. I'm lucky enough I have a chance to study these great, fascinating things. You can look at it from the absence of a negative. Like my father said to me one time, he says, you're lucky. A lot of kids your age, they're sent, out on the front line, and, they don't really have a choice, okay? You get to sit around twirling a pencil. You're pretty lucky. You should appreciate that. Okay, these things, again, having the proper attitude, and that's why it's so important, they enable you to concentrate for long hours. They enable you to memorize a lot more stuff because it's important to you. It's interesting. If your goal is to be a biologist, you're going to memorize a lot more detail than somebody who's just taking a biology test for the grade. Willingness to focus on a goal, to avoid distractions, to maintain focus for a long time. That's characteristic of geniuses, okay? They obsess on something until they figure it out. Intense personalities focused on learning. I think drawing really adds to academics. I wish I learned how to draw. And one of my big regrets in life right there. They're tenacious about learning. They're highly curious. And I know some of the really smart people I know because I actually took some advanced chemistry. I was considering becoming a chemist. And I hung out with some of these kids who were the best students in chemistry. And we just had an enjoyable fascination. It was fun for us to talk to each other. Because usually you take a class and there's 400 students in some giant lecture hall. Nobody knows each other. At the end of the semester, you see a little grade, and it's very impersonal. Versus in some of these advanced biology classes, I was hanging around with the kids. In my advanced biology classes, we're going bird watching, talking about nature, and my advanced chemistry classes, we're talking about synthetic mechanisms, and that was a lot of fun. Because we truly were interested in it rather than just, hundreds of people trying to get a grade. Okay, they often have a playful sense of humor. They're nonconformists. Because if you're going to be smart, you're going to end up being nonconformist. Because conformist is usually sort of average. It's not the highest levels. And you end up being confident. And you have to be confident because, for example, in my latest book here, this Medical Reformation, I basically refuted all the medical textbooks. I said it quite confidently. All the conventional medical textbooks in internal medicine, the internal medicine subspecialties, they all stink. They're all an embarrassment and a joke. And so you have to be, in order to be able to refute something, you have to be confident that you know better. And in order to get that confidence, you have to pay the dues to learn what it takes to be able to say that. So what I'm trying to say is that's why you want to instill confidence in a student to help them. And, they have to earn it, but it's also their approach to it. Because if they don't have that, how can they ever refute something if they're not confident? If you're intimidated by the expert, the farther you go in medicine or science, the more you recognize the vast majority of experts. Think about all the societal experts you've heard of, okay? Think of all the societal institutions you've heard of as the domain as the center of expertise, and you'll see one after another is fake and it sucks, okay? So that helps you develop your intellectual potential, okay? And what I used to say to myself is, like I said, I was playing Stratego and Mastermind, Monopoly with these guys who had, gotten in the 1400s on their SATs, and I'm like, I could hang with these guys. Why not me? Why can't I have a high SAT score? And when I was at Stanford and I started out, kind of doing lousy my first semester with B minuses, I'm like, why can't I be an A student? Why can't I ever get an A plus? And if you say it like that, then you push yourself to do more than they're doing. You could be surprised how well you're going to do. Okay, a good vocabulary, sign of verbal intelligence. Verbal intelligence is the most important one for school, actually for life too, because you got to tune it into being socially intelligent, but it's much more important than math. Math is important for engineering and physics and stuff, but not many people go into those fields. Reading for pleasure in one's free time is the most effective way to increase verbal intelligence. In a perfect world, we'd all have some intelligent person to talk to who would nurture us and build us up, but hardly anybody has that. They're lucky enough, maybe their parents or something. Okay, here's a Michael Crichton quote, and I like Michael Crichton. He's a great writer. He went to medical school, Harvard Medical School, and then he decided he wanted to be a writer instead of a doctor. And his books are a lot of fun. They're sort of a techno-thrillers, it's been called, and I think that's a good name for them. But he tells the truth about a lot of stuff. Okay, he says, this comes from Jurassic Park. They're technicians. They don't have intelligence. They have thin intelligence. They think narrowly. They don't see the consequences. Yeah, there's a lot of people like that in medicine. They got a very narrow expertise. They know the drugs in their field. Okay, but they're a little bit dangerous because they don't know much more than that. Okay, here's Edwards Demings, another one of these efficiency experts. Experience by itself teaches nothing. Without a theory, experience has no meaning. Without theory, one has no questions to ask. Hence, without a theory, there is no learning. And there's some truth in that. If you want to understand something big, like cancer, you need to know what the somatic mutation theory is. You need to know why it's almost entirely bogus. Then you need to know the metabolic theory of cancer, and you have to understand why. It's very accurate and is by far the most useful thing. And if you just study random data about cancer, but you don't know how to compare it from a somatic mutation theory point of view versus a metabolic theory of cancer point of view, you're never going to go very far with it. Okay, if you're interested in cancer, I got tons of lectures on the subject, tons of videos on it, but I'm just going to tell you, all the conventional books on cancer are basically a joke. Okay, when you start reading Seyfried takes you pretty far. He's good, but then I totally disagree on nutrition. He screwed up on nutrition in my opinion. But his theory, he was real good. Otto Warburg, etc., etc. Okay, next one here. This is a guy, real clever guy, Edward de Bono. Okay, he's another one of these thinking expert guys, and he's an MD, PhD. He said, intelligence is something we're born with. You have a genetic IQ, but thinking is a skill that's learned. That is true, okay? And unless we have complete information, which we seldom do, then you need thinking in order to make the best use of the information that we have. Very true. So one of his books is How to Teach Your Child to Think, and he had some good ideas. He's the guy who, he came up with some good stuff. I like him. Okay, the next one is Nietzsche. Okay, Nietzsche's kind of interesting. Nietzsche's always confrontational and controversial, but I think the deal about Nietzsche that's not widely talked about, he really hated Christianity, he really loved the ancient Greeks. A big thing that a lot of people don't know about him, I think he was homosexual and very ashamed of it. And he felt that Christianity was a rebuke of him. He felt that some of the ancient Greeks were, in a way, supporting his idea. The homosexuality of the ancient Greeks is over-exaggerated. But Oscar Wilde was a little bit of that same mentality. Okay? But I think that's part of why Nietzsche hated Christianity so much, because I think he saw it as a refutation of himself. A lot's been written on this, by the way. I don't say that lightly, because I know a lot of people like Nietzsche, and I like some things about Nietzsche, but when you study Nietzsche some more, you see that he was a bit of a crazy maniac, even though, yes, he's a genius, all right? But, who was his hero? Somebody like Napoleon. Napoleon was this mass murderer, okay? Napoleon was a great general, but And don't get me wrong, there were some things you could admire about Napoleon. He's got a lot of quotes. But, if he'd just tried to focus on helping France rather than trying to conquer the whole entire world, he could have really made France great. Instead, he led to the demise of most of the military-aged men of France, okay? He didn't leave France, that much better off, okay? So Napoleon went too far going into Rutsky land and messing with the Spanish, okay? He shouldn't have been doing that. All right, but that was Nietzsche's idea of a hero. And he hated Socrates, and he hated a lot of other scholars. He of course he thought all Christians are wimps. So I'm not going to get into that too much more. But anyways, I just tell you that about Nietzsche because very few people know that about him. So here's one of his quotes. Intelligence is a moving team of metaphors. So that's a good quote, and you'll have fun with Nietzsche, and, thus spoke Zarathustra. He thought that he was going to write the new version of the Bible. But I think Nietzsche helps you build your self-confidence, but Nietzsche can't get you there. I think he ended up dying of syphilis that he contracted from a prostitute, and he was just sort of pathetic in a lot of ways, too. So I actually think, Christianity totally inspires you to go beyond yourself, to see your destiny is to help solve a problem, to help the world, rather than just be stuck in some local little minor competition. And so it empowers you in that way. But I tell you that what I said about Nietzsche is I think that's part of his anti-Christian rhetoric, a big part of it. Okay? And I think Fyodor Dostoevsky, and I made a video of them in the debate based on their quotes, even though they weren't contemporarily speaking to each other. He was a big fan of Dostoevsky as a writer. I think that's intellectually quite helpful and emotionally helpful to make you stronger and more resilient. Because obviously Dostoevsky was a lot more resilient than Nietzsche. Nietzsche fell apart pretty easy when push came to shove. Okay, Thomas Carlyle. A person usually has two reasons for doing something. A good reason and then the real reason. I actually think this is one of the most important top 10 quotes of all time. Because in real life, people lie to you all the time. If you look on the internet, most experts are fake and they're lying to you. So you should always ask yourself, why are they lying to me? So for example, a perfect one is fluoride in the water. Yes, there's a theoretical good reason it helps your teeth, but that's not the real reason. The real reason is to make people stupid and docile. And what I'm trying to say is if you're a chump and you always believe the first thing you're told by a so-called fake expert, you're always going to be a stupid chump. To be smart, you have to ask yourself, well, does it really help that much? Well, if topical application is beneficial, why do people swallow it? Why do they absorb it into their body? Is that helpful? It obviously isn't. So you have to take it to the next level in order to be able to think in a nuanced, sophisticated way. Here's another great quote by Edward de Bono. Most mistakes in thinking are mistakes in perception rather than logic. Our logic is pretty good. If you give us the facts, we can figure out what to do with those facts. The problem is most people never get the correct facts. Like on fluoride, they never learn that it's a brain toxin. It increases traversal of the blood-brain barrier. It forms complexes with aluminum. It promotes leaky gut. It's toxic to the intestinal lining. It's toxic to the good gut bacteria. It increases cancer risk. They never have that additional information. Then you can say, with all that information, your logic will tell you, well, the risks outweigh the benefits, so it's a bad thing. Okay, most people just have the simple deck of, well, it's good for teeth. Okay. So you got to get more information in order to make smarter decisions. So a wise move is be skeptical at first, try to accumulate more information, and then make an informed decision with the logic that's probably good enough. Okay, here's an Ayn Rand. I love this quote too. And again, these are top 10 quotes of all time. If you think there is a contradiction, then recheck your premises. So I would have times when I couldn't figure something out because based on what I knew, it just didn't make sense. So like she says, recheck your premises means go back, get more information, and once you do that, a lot of times your initial assumptions were wrong, okay? The people putting fluoride in your water are not doing it to help you. They're doing it because they want to hurt you, okay? And once you get that, you can think a lot better. Conventional medicine is not there to help you. It's there to make money off you. It's there to sell you drugs and surgeries and imaging tests and blood tests, okay? Once you realize that, you can see what it's good for. It's good at curing acute disease. It's good at helping out with some chronic problems, usually the uncommon ones. But you can navigate the domain effectively because you have a more realistic data set. Okay, D.K. Simonton. A genius is someone who transforms their field. And I love that quote because somebody will say a lot of times somebody who's a really good student is a genius. No, there may be a prodigy, somebody who learns fast, who learns something well that they're taught. But a real genius is somebody who can take a field and change it, turn it upside down. So I think that's why I think McDougall's a genius. Is he'll take something like coronary artery disease and say, gee, stents don't work at all. Open heart surgery doesn't work at all. So I'll give him credit for that. I wouldn't hire him as a weatherman, but do I think he's great on these nutrition and health topics? Yes, I do. And I also think, part of becoming a genius in your field is you study the previous people in your field, okay? Anybody who studies nutrition is going to be much, 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 much better if they study the great nutrition experts. Study. And McDougall says this, and he's right. Study Kempner. Study Burkitt. Study Pritikin, okay? And there's other great ones out there too. Study them, because you can then take everything they've learned, and now you're like in a pretty strong position to then add more information and bring it in. Okay. Good quote by Zig Ziglar. Logic makes people think. Emotion makes them act. And that's a good one too. To most people, they're almost completely oblivious to logic. Like with patients, they almost never get it. You got to somehow make it emotional for them, and then you have a chance. But that's also why, like, I personally think getting a cardiac calcium CT scan is totally stupid. Anybody who ate the Western diet already has cardiac atherosclerosis. It's a fact. Why get a stupid test and radiate yourself? On the other hand, though, I've seen patients who, once they see those calcifications on the coronaries in their heart, then all of a sudden they feel energized to act and change their behavior, versus you could talk to them till you're blue in the face, and to them it's all nonsense. They don't understand any of the physiology, pathophysiology type stuff. And even most of them don't tend to really get the epidemiology as simple as it is. Okay, Ayn Rand. The purposeful, disciplined use of his intelligence is the highest achievement possible to man. And that's a little bit like Aristotle's quote. Thinking and contemplation are the highest pleasures in life, because unlike the other pleasures, they do not wax and wane. Making the two-back beast is a lot of fun, but it only lasts for a brief amount of time. Eating food is a lot of fun, but it only lasts, a few hours. Versus thinking and trying to understand something and studying it, that can go on for days, weeks, months, and years. Okay, here's another Ayn Rand quote, great quote. In order to live, a man must act. In order to act, he must make choices. In order to make choices, he must define a code of values. In order to define a code of values, he must know what he is and where he is. He must know his own nature and the nature of the universe. So he needs philosophy. There is no way to escape this need. The only alternative is whether the philosophy guiding him is to be chosen by his mind or chosen by others. Okay? And so I think most people, that's what they do. They just see what other people do. Oh, we're supposed to wear deodorant, so they put deodorant in their armpit. But someone who really thinks will often go against convention because it doesn't logically serve their interest to do it. Okay, here's some quotes by Nikola Tesla. He was also a great genius. He worked, of course, with Thomas Edison, the inventor. Tesla was a lot smarter at science, but Edison was smarter at the social and business aspect of things. And Westinghouse was also a genius, too, involved in, alternating current and some of those great electricity inventions. So Nikola Tesla. The mind is sharper and keener in seclusion and uninterrupted solitude. Originality thrives in seclusion, free of outside influences, beating upon us to cripple the creative mind. Be alone, that is the secret of invention. Be alone, that is where ideas are born. So I had the experience, being in high school with a lot of friends and really happy, and then going to Stanford and not knowing anybody and being painfully lonely for years. I mean, there was no escape from it. There was not going to be anything fun this weekend or the next weekend or the weekend after that or the month after that or the entire year, and you just knew that's how it was. And I hated it. But, man, I just kept getting better at school because I had nothing else to do but study and think about academic subjects. And I also know from experience, too, I used to be a surgeon, an imaging-guided surgeon, and I would get paged all the time. I'd have to go in at night on weekdays. I'd have to go in at night on the weekends. I could never do a long, complex project. Like I stopped writing books because I would get paged in the middle of, let's say, a Saturday morning. Got to go to the hospital. Got to put in a kidney drainage tube, percutaneous nephrostomy or something. And so I could never have predictable blocks of time. Then later on, when I switched to primarily mostly doing neuroradiology, I still do a little bit of interventional, and I still do general radiology, a few other things, but I do mostly neuroradiology. Then when I'm on, I'm on, but when I'm off, meaning that I don't have to worry about my beeper. I can just think and study. I actually found that what made me most productive was just to isolate myself. I one time, when I really wanted to complete, like I was worried about the new so-called infectious plague disease. Nobody knew what the heck was going to happen, and I wanted to write a bunch of books. I wanted to crank out like 6 books in 1 year. All I did was I stopped answering any emails. I stopped doing any social media. I would go to bed early, wake up early, and just write and study for writing those books. And I made tremendous progress because I was totally socially isolated. I got rid of my cell phone. I almost never talk to anybody. I mean, there's some people who I love talking to, but they know how to get me if they need to get me. I don't. But what I'm trying to say is by social isolation, your academic ability goes through the roof compared to what you are at a baseline, okay? Because most people, they're totally distracted. They're constantly getting calls on their cell phone. They're constantly doing cell phone. And unless you've got big blocks of time just to think, no emails, no distractions, nothing, you're not going to be able to have high-level academic achievement. It comes from prolonged thinking and obsessing about a subject and studying it in every possible way. Okay, Tesla continues. All that was great in the past was ridiculed, condemned, and suppressed. And that's very much like the Schopenhauer quote. All great truths are initially ridiculed, then they're violently opposed, and then they are accepted as obvious. Okay, here's a good Alfred North Whitehead quote. It takes an extraordinary intelligence to contemplate the obvious. Yeah, to recognize that something that seems obvious is actually an open question. And there's other quotes along those lines. Goethe, the most difficult thing to see is that which is right in front of our face, okay? And there's other quotes. Thomas Shaw's, the key to good thinking is not so much intelligence, it's courage. Because you take a lot of flack once you go in the opposite direction of conventional thought. Anyways, that's all I got for today's chapter on improving intelligence and understanding it. Hope that was helpful.